Good morning and welcome back to the 52nd Annual Progress Seminar Virtual Program Series, Day 2. On behalf of Chamber San Mateo County and the Progress Seminar Co-Chairs, Assembly Speaker, if I can talk, it's Friday, Pro Tem Kevin Mullen, San Mateo County Supervisor Carol Groom, Roseanne Faust, CEO Sam Sita, and Julie Lynn, Executive Secretary Treasurer of the San Mateo Labor Council. Thank you, Progress Seminar attendees. We appreciate your commitment and participation to this Progress Seminar. We have a very exciting and timely program for you this morning, and I want to acknowledge the generous support of our sponsors. This Progress Seminar is not possible without their support. Thank you to today's general session sponsor, W.L. Butler. And I also want to introduce our principal sponsors, Recology, San Mateo County, Comcast, and Meta, formerly Facebook. It is now my honor to introduce Ashley Quintana, Public Policy Manager, Community Affairs, Meta, who will share a short video with you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Quintana, Public Policy Manager at Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and we're so proud of being once again a sponsor for Progress Seminar. Thank you, San Mateo County Chamber of Commerce, for inviting us and making this event possible. As business, government, and community leaders, you all have experienced firsthand adapting to the last 18 months of intense challenges. As you heard in last week's panel, it took so many to navigate through so much uncertainty. It is the collaboration across sectors and the dedication to our community that will continue to strengthen the services and programs provided to those that have been hit the hardest. It's with these partnerships from our local government, business community, and nonprofit leaders that we continue to support our neighbors during these difficult times. We're so proud to have helped with the vaccination efforts by partnering with local agencies and nonprofits to help the hardest hit communities. We increased our food programs and launched our summer meal program with local school district to serve meals to students and families. We provided financial support for our small business community to maintain their operations and purchased meals from local restaurants, donated them to local banks, nonprofits, and our incredible frontline healthcare workers. Additionally, as part of our billion-dollar commitment to address the region's housing crisis, we partnered with local housing and homeless experts to invest in building housing for the region's lowest income neighbors. Thanks to these efforts of people like you here today, we are hopeful that these long-standing partnerships and investments continue to positively impact the community and alleviate some of the challenges posed by the pandemic. Now, we were this close in getting to meet in person, and I'm so optimistic that in 2022, it's going to be our year of in-person gathering, because I'm sure we all can agree it's an event many of us look forward to in the year. So with that, I hope that everyone enjoys this progress and is filled with innovative exchanges of ideas and thought-provoking discussions on how we can all positively impact the community we love. Happy progress.
Thank you, Ashley. It is now my great honor to introduce my dear friend, partner in crime. What more do you say about the Julie Lynn of this world? Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Co-conspirator, fellow, you-know-what, disturber, we all go with our strengths. It's an honor to be here this morning with all of you. Thank you so much for getting up early, joining us on a Friday, and coming together for our virtual Progress Seminar. Please ignore my colleague in the back. She will probably be verbally participating, so I apologize in advance because sometimes very strange things come out of her mouth, and I have zero control over them, as she is 4. So on behalf of the Labor Council, we are incredibly honored to partner with Chamber San Mateo County and with Amy herself. And this partnership collaboration with labor, business, community is something that's very dear to my heart. And I'm very excited to continue to work together to invest in our shared constituencies and our shared values and goals, and to continue to build upon the great work that everyone has been doing over the last many years. So with that, when we polled all of our previous attendees at Progress Seminar to figure out where your priorities lay, what your interests were, top of mind for so many was climate change and climate resiliency. And that is what leads us to this morning's incredible panel, which we have called Preparing for New Challenges, Wildfire Mitigation and Climate Resiliency. And we have some incredible panelists with us this morning. You can read through their bios in the link that Felicia sent out with the agenda. So I won't go into that, but with us right now, we have CAL FIRE Deputy Chief Jonathan Cox and County Climate Change and Adaptation Program Manager Hillary Papendick. And we anticipate being joined by County Office of Emergency Services Director Dan Belleville shortly. So we'll plug Dan in when he is able to join us. But with that, we will, oh, hi, Dan. All right, everybody's here. The gang's all here. Let's party. It's going to be exciting. So as I said, you can read through their bios in the links that Felicia sent out. But we have a few questions for our panelists to guide the conversation, but we also welcome you all to put additional questions in the chat, and we will do our best to monitor those and plug them in throughout this panel program. So first off, it seems that every community in San Mateo County has a climate change risk. On the bay side, it's flooding. On the coast, it's erosion, and wildfire risk is a reality for much of the county. How can the county support local cities with their climate adaptation work?
Well, I can jump in on a first response. So this is Hillary. Thanks. I'm really honored to be here on the panel and be part of the Progress Seminar. It's definitely a privilege. And it's a privilege for me to be working on climate change resiliency in the county. And it's such a big issue for us right now. So there are a number of ways that the county can help support cities and work collaboratively on preparing for climate change. Some ideas and some things that we're already doing at the county are providing technical analysis, doing studies to understand what the problem is. And because the climate risks go across county and city boundaries, it makes sense to do this at a scale that's not at every single city. So in 2018, the county did a study on sea level rise, and this helped lead to collaborative efforts on sea level rise preparedness, and especially the development of One Shoreline, a new agency specifically working on flooding and sea level rise. So coordination and collaboration is another huge area where the county can help support cities in moving forward on adaptation. There's just so much information out there on how to adapt, and it's important to develop shared projects from wildfire to heat to extreme storms, which we experienced recently, and to flooding. Another example is funding. So the county has funded some pilot projects around sea level rise to test out developing strategies and different ways of community engagement in partnership with cities, and then that can serve as best practices for other cities in the county, in the area. There are definitely some efforts to help coordinate wildfire work, which I'm sure Dan and Jonathan can talk about as well. So I'll leave it there and happy to share more.
Dan or Jonathan?
Yeah, thanks. And to echo the sentiments of Hillary, appreciate you having me here. I think there's quite a few things going on right now. The wildfires have really given us an opportunity throughout most communities, really across California, to capitalize on just the awareness that is really front of mind with everybody at the moment. I think we have the opportunity to really take this moment to have some meaningful impact across jurisdictions that otherwise wouldn't really think about the threat of wildfire. Probably the biggest thing in San Mateo County that we're seeing at the moment is kind of this desire to re-engage with the Fire Safe Council and work at kind of a holistic level on reducing the risk of wildfire. It doesn't help always to do small projects in locations that are kind of sporadically placed throughout the county. It's really about how does this all interconnect and how does this all reduce the risk across the board and not just kind of on a one-off location. So a few things that have gone on, especially in the unincorporated parts of the county, is a pretty big step towards reducing the risk of non-native trees and the threat that they pose. the county took actually an action to eliminate the need for permits for non-native trees that are within 100 feet of a structure for defensible space, which is a fairly big step for a government agency to do, to really take a bold step to reduce the risk around homes in a very meaningful way. The other things that are going on is a fuel reduction task force, which some of the two of the county supervisors are leading up, and looking at ways about how we incorporate all of these different factors, from fuel reduction to evacuation planning, to kind of the regional approach to land use and building codes, and how they all intertwine. Because this is, like many climate-driven issues, not a single kind of silver bullet that's going to solve it. It really takes engagement across a variety of jurisdictions and agencies and organizations to reduce the risk. So that's a long way of saying there's a lot going on, but it really is our opportunity at the moment to capitalize on it in the county to make sure we're all kind of moving in the same direction to reduce the wildfire risk.
Dan.
Julie, I think that, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. But I think probably just a couple of comments, just really mostly the tail end of what Chief Cox said. Working with Hillary, my shop, emergency preparedness and planning, I think the most important thing that we do is we all collaborate together. And he spoke to that just at the tail end of his comments. I think by us working together and identifying the problems throughout multiple jurisdictions and the need to address it on a sort of a holistic level, I think is really the most important, or one of the most important pieces that we bring to the table, is that we collaborate together. So I think it was well said, though, their comments.
Thank you. And that actually dovetails nicely into one of our next questions. You discussed collaborating together in your shared issue areas, for lack of a better term. One of the hallmarks, I think, of San Mateo County is the collaborative spirit of groups that are often seen as incredibly disparate, where in other places may have been at odds. Here we work together. So how is San Mateo County engaging and collaborating with community stakeholders to address climate change?
Hillary, do you want to start again? Or I was thinking about, the LHMP, but maybe we can talk about that a little bit later, but do you want to start with it?
Yeah, I think the LHMP is a great example. There are a number of collaborative efforts in the county. And I think that's one thing that makes me really proud to work at the county, is how collaborative cities and community groups are in dealing with some of these challenging issues. One example of some of the work the Office of Sustainability has done is develop a climate ready collaborative to bring together different stakeholders and community groups, state and federal agencies and nonprofits and businesses to start to talk about climate change, learn what the issues are, and develop shared solutions. So we launched the collaborative in 2019 and had a series of sessions. And then since the pandemic, it's been on pause, but we really learned a lot through the sessions that we had, which was sharing some of the best science and really listening to what the needs were from these various groups around the issues. So we've really used that to inform some of the efforts that we've led throughout the pandemic since launching the collaborative. One of the things that we really learned from the collaborative was working and through best practices of community engagement is really working with trusted partners who are working with underserved and disadvantaged in our communities in the county. So we did set up a model for the local hazard mitigation plan, which Dan can talk more about as well, where we partnered directly with community-based organizations to conduct outreach in their communities and in the language that their communities speak. And that was a great way to hear feedback from some people that are not traditionally involved in some of large planning processes.
Build on that, Julie, we refer to it as the LHMP. It does stand for the Local Hazard Mitigation Plan. In our case, San Mateo County's, we call it the MJ, the multi-jurisdictional. So it goes right to your point, Julie, that we are collaborating with, for the first time ever in San Mateo County, every single city and town in the county. So all 20 cities and towns. And then the county itself, 21, government agencies there. And then we had, I believe it was 16 partners for a total of 36 or 37, Hillary?
36 was the ending number, I believe.
Yeah, and for the audience, Julie, that includes, fire districts, water districts, all the various districts in the county. So it's a pretty robust plan where we reached out, like Hillary said, we reached out to those to the disadvantaged, all corners of the county, all jurisdictions. The idea of the LHMP is to submit a plan to FEMA. It's essentially a readiness plan for all the risks wherever we're out, whether it be climate change by erosion or flooding or fire or infrastructure work. We identify those hazards. Every one of our jurisdictions identifies those hazards. We submit it to both FEMA and Cal OES, and then we become essentially eligible for funding for mitigating some of those issues, because in the last 20 so years, FEMA has shifted their response mostly from post to pre. In other words, get ready for the incident, build for the incident so that it doesn't happen or become more catastrophic. So they're shifting those dollars in front of the incident before it happens. And so the multi-jurisdictional LHMP was just submitted to Cal OSHA and FEMA. It has been tentatively approved, so that'll queue us up or set us up for some pretty robust funding, we hope, in the coming years. These plans are developed every 5 years, and then we're in the midst of that right now. We did it 5 years ago, and here we are 5 years later submitting, and then we will maintain the plan every year to make sure that we're addressing or mitigating those hazards that have been identified throughout the county. So working with all of those jurisdictions and all of those cross groups and folks that have different sets of interests was really impressive, because we all came together to put this plan together and submit it to FEMA.
Congratulations, that's fantastic.
Yeah, Julie, just on the fire side, I think there's two real areas that we're focusing on with the community engagement. And the first piece is the kind of fuel reduction and vegetation management side. These projects that, whether they're roadside vegetation clearance or large shaded fuel breaks, they have to go across multiple people's land, basically. And since a majority of the land is privately held, there's a lot of community members that have to be willing to participate in a community-wide fuel reduction project. And then you also have to engage with the large landowners that are public organizations such as Caltrans, Post, MidPen. And that really is just a matter of bringing everybody to the table in agreement. The second piece is really on the community side, a little bit more related to the response, and Dan is a little bit more familiar with this, but we've also seen a pretty big engagement, especially in the kind of more remote areas of just the community emergency response teams in CERT, and people really wanting to actually help during the moment on some of these climate disasters. I think the coast has kind of led the way in modeling what that looks like from a grassroots effort. But I think that the idea of these kind of larger disasters occurring require community engagement, both on the preparedness side, but also being prepared to kind of work with the volunteers that come forward during the disasters to help in the moment.
Thank you. And Dan, you referred to federal funding. So in that same vein of external funding for emergency response, the legislature and the governor approved billions in the budget for climate resiliency and adaptation. How can San Mateo County access those funds, and what would be some priority projects? Dan, you're on mute.
My apologies. We do meet with the governor's office regularly. We have a representative from the governor's office frequently come into our emergency operations center, which is still open from the COVID response. And that communication also allows us to be in tune with the various grants and outreach that the governor's office does in terms of climate change or other preparedness measures for emergencies. And so we are constantly seeking and monitoring grants. We probably have a half a dozen grants in play right now. In fact, there was a fire safe grant that was just awarded to us, I believe it was yesterday, Chief Cox, myself, and a number of individuals worked to collaborate on submitting for this grant over the course of the last 6 or 8 weeks, and we were just awarded that grant yesterday. And it's, I think, $175,000 for the next year for someone to help us mitigate some of the fire hazards and risks that Chief Cox spoke to. And so this is a perfect example of the types of things that my office is in touch with at the governor's office in order to address the concerns that we have. So I would characterize the last couple of years as being far more active than they have in the past with regard to grants that are available, outreach that's being conducted all the way from not only Fire Safe, like I mentioned, but things like Drought Task Force and water resource support for those counties that are in need. We've been declared a Drought Task Force, our county has been declared a drought emergency, like many counties throughout the state. So there are these opportunities for us to seek, and they are active at all times. Like I said, every week we're dealing with a new one to see whether or not we qualify or whether we can help our citizens in some way with what's being offered.
Hillary, you came off mute. Are you going to jump in?
I think that I don't have much to add. We are also tracking grants, and I think it's just a really interesting time right now, thinking about the amount of funding that could be available for climate adaptation and resiliency. It really feels like a big opportunity for the county and for the region to start to make a lot of progress in moving from studying the problem to on the ground changes to help increase the resiliency of our communities. One area that I think there's a lot of opportunity in is extreme heat in the county. It's not something that we often think of as an impact, but with climate change and with a lot of our homes not having air conditioning, we're actually quite vulnerable. So that's one area that we might be able to get grant funding for, in addition to wildfire and flooding and sea level rise.
Jonathan, anything to add?
Yeah, if I could figure out the way to get state money easily, I think I would hit the jackpot. But
weird, same.
And I say that as a state employee, so tongue in cheek. Like everything, I think there's the kind of defined channels to getting the funding. Where I see a lot of success in this county is the groups that come together to collaborate for funding. And I bring Fire Safe up as an example of that. It's an organization where you have multiple jurisdictions and multiple agencies coming forward to participate. And I feel as though, especially when it comes to fire and multi-jurisdictional, that collaboration goes a long way when applying for money and for grants, especially on disasters that affect all these jurisdictions at the same time, showing that there's collaboration at the local level. As being someone who has rated grants at the state level is very top of mind, because it shows that it's going to have the most kind of impact at the kind of execution level or when it gets implemented. Apart from that, I don't know the nuts and bolts about getting the money, but I do know that that is one of the biggest ways to succeed.
Should you figure out those nuts and bolts and find a pathway to free money, do give me a call. Amy has my contact information. So relative to collaborative execution, I'm going to pull a question from the chat from Mayor Diane Howard of Redwood City. Mayor Howard says, how often are you able to host a mock scenario with your collaborators to test your readiness? And would we be able to attend to learn more?
Good morning, Mayor. This is Dan Belville, and maybe I'll jump in on that. One of the grants we're working on right now is a grant for evacuation, because one of the most important elements of these significant fires that we've been seeing in recent years are the speed with which they're moving due to the fuel that's burning and of course the winds that drive them. And perhaps our listeners have heard that we use Zonehaven to help us manage our evacuation. In fact, we used it the CZU fire. Chief Cox was instrumental in helping develop the product to help evacuate folks. Essentially, in its simplest terms, is it allows all of public safety to work off of one sheet in terms of coordinating the evacuation of residents. And as I mentioned, we effectively use it at the CZU fire. And so with that said, we are using some grant money right now and collaborating with jurisdictions on preparing for a zone haven evacuation drill in the next couple of months. So we're building that as we are speaking. We've been working on it for a couple of months, and we are collaborating with police and fire and EMS throughout the county. We have an open forum and an open committee to help drive what the exercise will look like. And it will be a countywide drill conducted so that we can test the effectiveness of zone haven and getting people out. So we look forward to that in the next couple of months, but it's one minor example of how we can collaborate and work with other cities in order to achieve a safe evacuation of our residents.
Jonathan or Hillary, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think this whole idea of fuel reduction is kind of top of mind of everybody right now. And I think for good reason. There's a couple pieces on it that I think are worth noting is just, fuel reduction's expensive when we do it mechanically. And it also is kind of politically untenable when we do it kind of naturally through burning. People don't like the smoke that we produce or the threat that we may have an escaped fire. So I think one of the most important things that we come back to is vegetation management is the responsibility of the landowner. And that's a lot of times not what people want to hear when they talk about vegetation management, because the kind of idea that CAL FIRE or someone's going to come in and manage the lands is kind of a little bit pervasive out there at the moment. So I think the mayor is spot on, is it does take this united front to kind of really reinforce that we must do vegetation management and reduce the actual fuels out there. But we have to do it in a way that we actually kind of inform the landowners that it is their responsibility as landowners to manage their lands and not the kind of public agencies' responsibilities. As far as the messaging goes and the communications, we sent out a mailer this month to all of the unincorporated and the coast side, just giving information about how to kind of evacuate, prepare your property. And I think it really does just take that frequency. It's like marketing, right? That frequency, recency effect of this information getting out there. And I think it's incumbent upon all jurisdictions at the moment to really keep pushing that message. Because the issue is not going away, and it does take a lot of hard work and sometimes money to actually succeed.
Hillary, anything to add?
I don't have anything to add on that topic.
Okay, and you all are professional panelists. You're touching on all kinds of different questions. I'm going down my list. Nope, Jonathan just answered that. So you are overachievers. I both like it and also find it challenging. But in the chat from Mitchell Oster, I don't know where Blippi is, baby. How has climate change adaptation impacted ongoing preparations for the inevitable major earthquake coming? Ooh, good one, Mitchell. Earthquake preparedness. Lay it on us.
I think earthquakes are Dan's, right? That's all Dan.
Yeah, I'm scrambling to read.
That's exactly what I heard. Yeah.
I'm scrambling to read the question again. So how has climate change adaptation impacted ongoing preparation? Well, I think that, I guess a little background, I think that earthquake was always our biggest risk. It seemed to me, having spent many decades here in this county, earthquake was the big concern in the Bay Area. And, this destructive force that has. And we were always kind of insulated from fire. We used to kind of call San Mateo County the asbestos forest. We had that, that marine climate that would come in, and things have changed now. So earthquake is not quite in front of center, but it definitely is, because it could happen at any moment. I'm not sure how I'm not sure how climate change has impacted the preparation for earthquake, other than it's my job in my office to prepare for all emergencies, whether they be fire or earthquake or flood or whatever else, the things that we've talked about this morning. Maybe I'll defer this one to Hillary. I might punt it to you because you might be able to tie the two pieces together and shed some light. Hillary, do you mind?
Yeah, no, that was a helpful background. Only the connection that I see is around liquefaction and flood risk in earthquake zones. So I don't know necessarily if that's affecting our preparations, but maybe it should. If we think about areas, a lot of the bay shore of the county is formerly wetlands, and there's some liquefaction risk there. So liquefaction is when there's an earthquake and the soil turns to kind of like liquid. And it can have, like in the '89 earthquake, parts of the marina, those homes collapsed because there was some liquefaction because there's not a lot of secure soil. So I think maybe there's some combination of flood risk and earthquake, but we have to have this scenario where we have a big flood coming and there's an earthquake at the same time, kind of this major compilation of risks, which I think could happen.
Hillary, you reminded me that, this is one correlation is, again, because of these fast moving fires. I know we're talking a lot about it, but with the CZU fire, one of the first things that we did immediately after the fire was to prepare for debris flow, because these fires are burning so furiously, they completely wipe out the landscape. So then you get a debris flow scenario, much like what was experienced a few years back in Southern California when 25 or 26 people were buried in their homes. And so I think, picking up from what Hillary said is we get the fire in the CZU area, it burns the landscape off. So then when the rains come and sort of sporadic, unpredictable rains, and then perhaps if there's an earthquake, then we may be more prone to slides, whether they be on the roads or where people live. So there's one minor example of how climate change, the increasing threat of fire, and when it happens like it did, burns the landscape, then we get an earthquake. So it could create maybe more vulnerable situations where slides would occur and block roads or trap people. So that's the kind of thing that I think we might be looking at in the future as far as our preventative measures.
And maybe one other thing to add is climate change adaptation definitely, as Dan mentioned, makes us think about multiple hazards happening at the same time. For instance, when we had COVID, we had the fire, we had smoke and heat all coming at once, which could help us prepare for an earthquake. If we're already dealing with no power and a lot of things that could happen with an earthquake, and we might be better prepared for earthquake.
And going back to the discussion of the CZU fire last year, as we're looking at fire season, we're looking at rainy season. How do the folks on the coast in the CZU burn scar prepare for rainy season? Because we saw some of those challenges manifest during our big storm front that came in a week or so ago. So how can folks in such areas prepare to confront the rainy season while they're still dealing with the repercussions of fire season?
The Department of Emergency Management has done a considerable amount of outreach. We've worked with the CERT folks to get information out, including pamphlets and face-to-face contacts with regard to the risk of what they're facing in those areas. It's a bit of a challenge for us. Some of the folks in the more remote areas of the county like to be left alone. They're robust folks that certainly can manage their lives. But I think sometimes folks are not aware of the kind of scenario we've been placed in with this fire in the last couple of years. So we do our best to do outreach. We do alerts with our warning system for those folks that are most impacted. We try to do a considerable amount of outreach through Facebook and other social media with our information chief with regard to the risk. So we try to take advantage of the scenario that they might be facing when it happens and do the outreach to the best of our ability. Again, whether it be face-to-face or social media or emails, we try to use all those means to get the information out and let people know, what they might be faced with. And then of course we do that with all emergencies. So in the last couple of weeks. I think some of us recall the Loma Prieta earthquake. So then we have the Great Shakeout, which is an exercise that many government agencies participate in. And when there's an opportunity to raise the level of awareness, we take advantage of those just like we would with anything. So it's ongoing, it never stops. It includes all emergencies and taking advantage of everything that we have at our disposal.
Hillary, did you want to add?
I want to add.
Oh, baby wants to add. No addition right now, sweet girl. We have another question in the chat from Redwood City Fire Chief Emeritus Stan Maupin. Is Zone Haven applicable in other disasters besides woodland fires? Is it set up over the entire county or just the interface areas? I think that's you, Chief Cox.
Yeah, thanks. So the Zone Haven platform was originally designed for wildfire. It applies to all portions of the county. So the county has taken the lead to basically zone out the entire county, but it is multi-hazard. So we used it a week ago for the large storm that came through for the debris flow in the South County. It's available for an air crash or an active shooter or a tsunami. I think it's best known right now because wildfire has been the most frequent disaster that we've faced across the state. But by all means, we're trying to direct everybody back to a single point of kind of reliable source information regarding evacuations, regardless of the hazard.
Another one from the chat, just to keep you guessing and not give you the prepared questions so that you can think on your feet early on a Friday morning, because that's what everyone deeply enjoys. From Kaiser Government Affairs Director Stacy Wagner. My parents live in a remote area outside of San Mateo County. CAL FIRE sent them a notice last year letting them know what measures they needed to take, clearing trees, brush, etc., within 100 feet of all property. Has CAL FIRE done this in SMC?
Yeah, great question. So we refer that as a defensible space inspection. And really what it is to remind homeowners that live in the state responsibility area of California that they are required to keep 100 feet of defensible space around their home. In San Mateo County, we do that. I don't know the exact number this morning. We get the numbers every Monday, but it's in the thousands that we've done this year alone. And what we try to do is we can't get to every property every year, just the amount of people it takes to do that one-on-one. But what we aim to do is visit every property at least once every 3 years. And that's really just going in, getting firefighters on the ground, walking around the property, talking to the property owner, and ensuring that they're adhering to these 100-foot fire safe regulations. It is probably the single most important thing that someone can do who lives in a high fire hazard area is to prepare the area around their structure. Second to that is to actually change the materials that are on their home. So getting rid of wood shake roofs, having double paned windows, getting kind of vegetation away from right against the building. There's a lot of good research that's come out, especially from the Camp Fire, regarding home survivability and what homes survive and what don't. Defensible space clearly works, home hardening clearly works, and really ensuring that where the home is positioned on the topography or the landscape is also considered during new construction, because a lot of those natural features play into home survivability. So a long way of answering, yes, we do it every 3 years. You should be getting a knock on the door. And again, it is highly important for your home surviving.
Julie, I might add a little bit on some history on this. Again, having spent a number of decades on the fire side of things, quite honestly, at least my experience as a fire marshal and serving in a number of different ranks, it had been a challenge for much of my fire service career to get folks to participate in helping clean their properties, as Chief Cox mentioned, provide that clearance. And I think I can tell you now, I've never seen such a sweeping change as I have in recent years. I think probably obviously because of the destructive fires but it seems like just about everybody's in concert now. The grants are available. We've talked about Fire Safe. Chief Cox talked about dozens and dozens, maybe even 100 active projects in our county at various levels, either planning or have been done or are underway. Property owners are paying attention and contributing. It seems like for the first time ever, everybody's in sync with the interest of mitigating the problem before the fire starts. We certainly have a long way to go, and Chief Cox may disagree with me because maybe his folks are still challenged by trying to, push people to clean their properties. But at least my experience, it's better than it's ever been. So that's a good thing. The trend is changing in the positive so that folks help us, help them, and we all help each other.
I'm challenged to push my child to clean anything. So if Jonathan's having challenges pushing people to clean their property, I feel your pain. I would also like to advocate for an increase in weed abatement goats. I find them adorable, and it brings me great joy when I see them on the side of the freeway cleaning out the brush. So more team goats. On the, stand back. Can you hold on for a sec, little babe? I know it's challenging. Again, my colleague, it's, got a lot going on over here. All right, from another one from the chat, Nora Java from HIP Housing. I've thought for several years that universities should start offering programs in disaster management / climate change to prepare the future workforce for best practices in handling fire, flood, earthquake, drought, etc. Just curious if the panel has any thoughts on this and if it's being discussed at the state level. So university disaster management program, disaster prep.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Hillary.
Well, I actually don't know if it's been being discussed at the state level, so you might have an answer to that. But it's a great idea. And one thing I did want to share is that at the county, we have a education program called the Sustainability Academy for community members throughout the county, and it's an 8-week program. And one of the courses is focused on local sustainability and climate change. So it goes through different climate change impacts, and it is maybe not as detailed as this. This would be a really great workforce development program, but it has helped people transition into careers in climate change or related fields. So we've seen people do the course, and then there's a volunteer component. So the people who graduate do 40 hours of volunteer work in the community. And then we've seen some of those graduates go into fields related to the topics discussed. But this seems like one of those types of programs that could be a win-win-win, where you're really helping to create more trained people to address some of these impacts.
Yeah, I was going to almost echo the fact that, high school may also be an important place to get people aware of this. I think, I think back to my high school career and getting interested in emergency services. And giving the opportunity to young people to really understand the fields that are out there and the impacts that they could have would be something that I think would be a really cool program. I do know at the state level, Cal Poly has started the first wildland urban interface program for wildfire, which is the first in the state to really focus on the WUI issue, which is a pretty big advancement. That comes on the heel of their forestry and fire protection program. And then obviously locally, Stanford's been doing a lot of research. I think it's through the Wood Institute to really delve and dive more into the research side of wildfire. So I do feel there's momentum. I don't know of kind of a practitioner level tactical program for college students at the moment. Definitely a good idea, and also maybe even considering getting it down to the high school level to pique that interest. So that we do have the best and the brightest leaders for the future for dealing with this issue in the next generation.
I thought I'd just add that the Office of Sustainability has been working with high school students over the past 2 years on a program called Youth Climate Ambassadors. And we also have a Silverized Science program. And the Youth Climate Ambassadors has been we started as a pilot last year, and this is our 2 years ago, and this is our second year. We've had about 50 to 70 students go through the program. And it's just been fascinating to see the students' commitment to climate change. They also do a project in their community. And The first cohort actually started a Youth Climate Ambassadors alumni group because they really wanted to keep involved in the issues. And even throughout the pandemic, all but one of the students made it through the entire year-long program. So you could really see their commitment. So part of that program is really recognizing that these are the future leaders on climate change, and students really want to know what's happening and how to get involved.
Julie, I'll only add that one of my folks in my shop in the Department of Emergency Management has a master's degree. I think it's in emergency management, and I think he was at Las Vegas. What is that? UNLV. So the programs are out there, and I did a Civics 101 class. The county's in the middle of doing a Civics 101 class for community awareness. And one of the students came up, or one of the folks that attended came up and said, "What do you think about a career in this?" And I said, "I think it's wide open. I think that if you get a background in emergency management or disaster preparedness or public administration, any of those, I think you don't go down this track of, addressing the question that was raised here for best practices in handling earthquake, drought, fire, whatever. I think it all dovetails very nicely. So I think it's a great career path. I think it already exists. I think it would become probably more prevalent in more universities because nationwide, we just seem to be having more emergencies. And so it's not going away. It'll be with us forever. So I think it'd be a great career path for those that might want to transition or for youngsters that are looking to get into it.
Speaking of the evolution of emergency response, the global pandemic saw us all utilizing technology more and utilizing it differently since we could no longer be together in person. As evidence, we're all now Zoom professionals, except like me, when you forget which buttons you're supposed to push to do what, or your kid, hangs up on your call. So in the chat from Redwood City Fire Chief Iverson, how was technology utilized during this fire season, and what new technology do you foresee being implemented in the future?
Yeah, very good question, and on a kind of a great forum for it being in the heart of the Silicon Valley. There's a couple big advancements that have been made on the technological front, and first and foremost, the governor's request for innovation, the RFI that was conducted about 2 years ago, saw a couple pieces of technology come out of it. One being what is our kind of predictive fire modeling tool that is called TechnoSilva. And TechnoSilva really takes all of the collective data of the past, the fuel moistures, the temperatures, the anticipated weather, and kind of gives us a really solid risk profile of where wildfires may break out and where they may become very large. So that's very important for us. So as we're preparing for, let's say, a wind event to come through or a weather event, a heat wave, we can deploy our resources to the most critical areas where we may have the highest likelihood of having a fire. Is it a perfect science? By no means, but it's leaps and bounds beyond where we've ever had before when it comes to predictive modeling. The second piece of technology that's really become groundbreaking, and you probably saw a lot of the images from the Dixie and the Caldor fire, is we now have the ability to have almost real-time intelligence about where the fire's perimeter is. And that sounds fairly mundane, but for us in the community, that's really important to know exactly where the fire's perimeter is. In the past, we would have IR flights maybe once every 12 to 24 hours, which we would build our maps off of. But now having that real-time overhead intelligence where we can have an idea where the fire is a big step forward. Going forward, I think there's a lot of technologies that are emerging. We start to look at the autonomous devices that may become a part of the fire service here in the future, drones, UASs. We start to look at, even more integration with current technologies like CAD systems and AVL systems that take place. And these are all very good kind of tools to help us do our job better. But at the end of the day, fire only goes out when water hits it or it runs out of fuel. So although they're helpful tools, we can't over-index on them as to solving the problem. They can just help us be more successful.
And what about, and this wasn't part of Chief Iverson's question, but what about cross-agency digital communication. So between Jonathan, you talked about different communication models in fire, but throughout the various partners in emergency response, what are some pieces of technology that either are being utilized or are going to be utilized for cross-jurisdictional emergency response communication?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And, I think we are in the early days of digital divide between jurisdictions, in the sense that, if you go back 60 or 70 years, we were just coming into the radio kind of establishment of interoperability. And you hear that word still, of interoperability with radio frequencies. We are just starting to touch the surface of what does interoperability mean when we look at dispatch, CAD, AVL, all the systems that we all use differently across the state. How do they all communicate to each other, and how do they all interface? How do we track a resource from Napa as well as track a resource from San Luis Obispo at the same time? We're starting that process. San Mateo County is probably, and I'm obviously biased, like most of us, is on the cutting edge of this. Not only do we have a boundaryless fire service in San Mateo County, which is fairly unheard of in the state, we also have the same dispatch center, which is unheard of, and we all use the exact same platform on our apparatus. So our captains and our chiefs on all of our apparatus can see everyone else in the county. They can see where the gaps are, if someone's closer, where the incident might be. And that intel sharing, that location, that kind of breaking down of walls and transparency between agencies is something that we take for granted here. I go to other counties and I'm blown away by the fact that we're so far ahead with this. We're a little bit of a model for the state. So I think we're in early days because at the end of the day, all of our apparatus have iPads or tablets in them. It's how do we best interrelate those to each other so that there's no barriers to being successful.
I might not biased to be secure in the superiority of our county, Jonathan. You're speaking our truth, and that's fine. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, that's quite all right. I enjoy your fun sense of humor. So the other technologies, at least from my perspective, flood in every day. We're constantly evaluating. We're getting weather reports, whether we were preparing for the debris flow on the last rains that we had a week or so ago. Weather reports and data is so incredible now. We're tapping things that we never had access to before, whether they be remote sites up in our own county or internet modules that we have that tie us into the latest information gathering. We have remote cameras. Chief Cox and I worked on the first remote camera to identify the speed with which a fire might be, verifying, and then the speed with which a fire is growing. And it took us like a year and a half to get one camera up at CSM. And then now we have dozens and dozens of cameras, identifying fires where they break out so we can pinpoint the type of response that's required. So we have remote cameras. We have Zone Haven that we talked about, which is a new technology. All of the outreach that we talked about, the alert system, we're replacing our alert system with a modified alert system through the state of California. There's technologies are coming in fast and furious. We now have a platform for the next gen 911 that he spoke to, which is a new CAD, the computer aided dispatch. So we will see advancements in the CAD base that we just installed a year ago that are unprecedented. We didn't even know how many wonderful technologies will come from having this base in place. So we're set up, well set up for the future to incorporate the cameras, the remote cameras, the dispatch services, the video and digital information that will come through is just almost endless. So it's really trying to keep up with all of it. But we're well positioned, I think, is the bottom line.
Hillary, anything to add?
I'm learning a lot from this really impressive efforts.
See, that goes back to the superiority of San Mateo County, which we are all very comfortable with. Tell your friends. Good point in the chat from Hillsborough Councilmember Marie Chuang. Appreciate much the shifting focus to prevention, preparation, and planning. The continuous reminder for all residents to sign up for SMC alert and emergency alert when travel are critical. Absolutely. I get texts all the time about street closures, about flood challenges. I get them from SFO. So definitely sign up for the text alert system so that you can know what's going on in the county, particularly during an emergency. Reminder that the chat is open to all for questions, but to give our panelists a break from the off-the-cuff answers, we will go back to our previously scheduled programming. Given the impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise and worsening wildfires in the wildlife-urban interface, how can we balance the need to address climate change with the need to build more housing?
I can take the first stab on this. It's maybe the $1 million question. How do we make sure we have enough housing for everyone in the county that's affordable and that's also safe from climate change, which, as we know, we're experiencing climate change now, and then the impacts are increasing over time, which leads to more areas in the county that could be at risk from different hazards. So one thing that the county has done over the past couple of years is we have the Climate Ready Initiative, which I mentioned, which is the Office of Sustainability's work to prepare for climate change. And then there's the Home for All initiative, which is the collaborative effort across the county and cities to help increase housing and address housing issues throughout the county. So the Home for All and Climate Ready got together and put together a task force. And we had membership from the Redwood City Chamber on the task force. So thanks for the contributions from the chamber. And the task force did some learning and then put together a toolkit of different policies and case studies on how we can build housing that's climate resilient. And we're just about to release the toolkit. It goes through, what are the impacts for the county, summarizes, and then comes up with some examples of what can we do to address heat and wildfire and sea level rise, ranging from different land use policy changes to home hardening or different changes to the actual structures. So hopefully this is helpful to cities who are updating our housing element right now and to others just trying to get a sense of how do we continue to increase our housing in the county and make sure that it's climate resilient. So there's definitely not a one size fits all approach, and we want to make sure that we're building away from the most hazardous areas. But I really do think that there are innovative strategies to build climate safe housing.
Jonathan or Dan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can kind of touch on the wildfire piece. This is a big deal for us at the moment because it really comes down to this land use planning piece. And I will say we are way far ahead of this than we were 10 or 15 years ago. The infrastructure we have currently in the wildfire prone areas was built out during a time when we didn't have fire safe regulations. We didn't have road width regulations for evacuations. We didn't have home hardening requirements for building. So I think the fact that we're even talking about this and we have systems in place for when and how to build in the remote wildfire areas, we're way beyond where we were 10 years ago. The state actually, about 5 years ago, put a land use planning program within CAL FIRE to work with each county's planning and building department to build in wildfire preparedness into the housing element of the general plan. I know that's very technical kind of minutia, but it's super important because what it really does is that guiding document for the county and for cities that have high fire hazard severity zones. It really says that, acknowledgement must be given to how you're going to mitigate against these wildfire threats when you're putting this housing in place. And with that, really getting away from the idea of housing or fire and saying, how do we build housing to adapt to a fire environment? And that's really the goal of it all, is that the adaptation piece. So probably the $1 million question for the Bay Area with the price of housing, but also luckily some efforts being kind of moving forward to try to address it.
And we have a couple of questions in the chat relative to schooling. Part of it from Sequoia Union High School District Trustee Stevenson, and then dovetailed from Michael Barber with the county. It would be great to integrate real life experience with academics. Example, how about requiring sustainability students to work as seasonal wildfire firefighters during the summer? So how are we cross-training our folks that are academically interested in the subject, if at all?
Yes, we're hiring right now. So it's a great moment to kind of highlight that. You know, we have a seasonal firefighting force, kind of our main troops for the summer are a seasonal force. And it's a great opportunity for someone who may have an academic interest and wants to spend a few years in the summer learning how to be a firefighter or what climate change is. What we always like to say is the seasonal firefighter job for CAL FIRE, you are literally on the front lines of climate change in this state. You are going to see what it looks like throughout a summer. It's not easy. It takes a lot of time and is strenuous and mentally difficult. But by all means, if people are interested, that is a program that is open right now. It closes in mid-January and then hires in the spring. And in San Mateo County, we are actually finishing signing the paperwork with CSM so that if someone goes to the CSM college for the General Fire Academy, they will also get their CAL FIRE seasonal certification out of it and can transition to an application for a job as well.
I'll add a little bit. If I can take a couple steps back, I wanted to shout out to Marie. She raised the question about signing up. She didn't raise a question. She raised the point about signing up for the alert and warning, which is a terrific reminder. I report to Marie, actually one council member from each of the cities and towns. That's my board, the Emergency Services Council. Marie serves on that. So we stay in contact, going back to our earlier questions. The county stays in contact and listens to the direction of those council members that make up the Emergency Services Council. I meet with them quarterly. So thank you for that, Marie. She also mentioned CERT, and you may talk about that in a moment, but I want to dovetail on what Jonathan just said. I think it's great what he said. I think it's terrific what she reminded us that CERT folks are fantastic. These are community emergency response teams. They can be very useful in helping during or before an emergency. As I mentioned early on, I think in the first couple of questions, we used the CERT folks to help knock on doors for those people that had to be evacuated up at the CZU fire. So CERT people can be used for things like that. There are limitations. We did find that during the COVID response that we were going to, in previous plans, deploy CERT folks to help during a pandemic, but we found that couldn't, that was not a workable plan once we were in the middle of COVID, because a certain number of our CERT folks are at that age where they're at a greater risk with the pandemic. And then sometimes there might be issues with mobility and topography and things like that. So CERT folks bring just a wonderful addition to our preparedness and mitigation efforts, but there are limitations because of age and mobility and those kinds of things. So like anything, and what Michael mentioned here with bringing folks, in as seasonal firefighters, there's always challenges. We're dealing with one right now. I'm working with our VRS, our vocational rehab folks, the folks that are recovering from whatever's occurred in their past, to try to help us do some vegetation management. But then they have to use tools that put them at risk. So with everything we do, there's a challenge. So it's wonderful to have CERT folks. It's wonderful to bring these students in as firefighters, but there's always challenges in doing it. But we always look for those opportunities and take advantage of them when we can. But they're all great ideas, and we encourage folks to, whether they want to join a CERT team or as Michael said, have these students learn as firefighters. It's terrific, but it's not always doable. But it is a great idea, and we do explore those ideas and do it to the extent that we can.
Thank you. Another one from our previously scheduled programming. San Mateo County has placed great value on protecting open space. Ironically, that open space now presents a risk to some communities. How do we balance competing interests? Well, that's a heck of a question. How do we balance competing interests ever in anything? No candy for breakfast.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay, silence please. So again, I'm sorry, are you distracted for some reason? Can't imagine why.
Yes, candy.
Zip it.
Yes,
The question was
candy.
protecting open space and open space
Candy.
being a community risk. How do we
Candy.
balance that? Dear
Candy.
God,
Candy.
zip it. Oh my word.
Yeah, I can take the first stab at this, Julie. And I don't want to speak for any land agencies, but I do think you're seeing a very, I'm speaking from the fire perspective, obviously, a very big kind of initiative at the moment across most of the large, if not all the large landowners in the county, on long-term fuel reduction efforts. This includes, SFPUC, Mid-Penn, county parks, state parks, and just like private landowners, they're really leading the charge for the fuel reduction efforts on public lands. The county parks has done a phenomenal job of prioritizing and implementing a fuel reduction plan, and that goes across the board with other agencies. Now, the difficulty in it is not only the kind of administrative side for getting all the studies completed and making sure that the plan is legal. It's also the kind of the funding to how do you pay for all the vegetation management. If you're going to burn, is it how often are you able to actually burn? Are the burn days in the Bay Area are fairly limited due to the air quality restrictions? And you have community buy-in from local communities about the reduction efforts that you're making. So fuel reduction on public land is happening more now than I've ever seen in the county. It's not straightforward in the sense that everyone sees the same method for getting to the outcome the same way. But again, it's really the landowner's responsibility and some really good work going on in this county at the moment.
Hillary or Dan, anything to add?
I would only mention that when the two competing interests come together, it's our duty to try to mitigate or prevent the two conflicting with one another. So it's great to have open space. It's great to have people get out there, but it puts our county at risk when people are in the parks or whatever. And, we get fires and things like that as a result. And so it's our job to, for example, shut down a park and collaborate with the Parks Department or jurisdictions so that during high-risk events, we minimize the potential for, again, using a fire as an example from occurring. So to the extent that we can, we collaborate when we know there's risk, and we try to use our technologies and outreach to keep people informed. To make sure there's not a conflict so that we can enjoy our open space, but not threaten our open space at the same time. So we do our best to stay on top of it, but people are people and it's always a challenge, but we're always up for it. And we stay in tune with it as much as we can.
I would echo the comments that have been said.
And so shifting to just some broader preparation metrics, what can residents do to prepare for the varying risks that we've discussed? Earthquake, fire, flood, plague of locusts, you never know. We had COVID, so God knows what's coming next. So what can residents do to be as prepared as possible for the next disaster, whatever form that may take?
That's probably my shot, Julia. I think I'll tackle it. I think that information is just about everywhere. So you can log in on the county website and you can go to the Department of Emergency Management and you can gather information there. You can go to CAL FIRE. You can go to Cal OES. You can go to your local jurisdiction. Many of the jurisdictions throughout the county have emergency managers. In fact, there's an Emergency Managers Association that we also meet with regularly. And so if you live in a particular jurisdiction and you look up on your website, For example, Marie from Hillsborough, you'll be able to find information there from Central Fire. So there's lots of information on earthquake preparedness, fire mitigation, COVID. There's information everywhere. So I would just recommend go to your local jurisdiction, go to CAL FIRE, go to Cal OES, go to the county, and you'll find copious amounts of information. And if you can't find it, then call your local jurisdiction or call the county. Call my shop at the Department of Emergency Management. We'll help direct you if you can't find it. But it's very easy, mostly at your fingertips, just by spending a few minutes on the computer.
Yeah, I will kind of give one additional there for fire. Readyforwildfire.org is probably the best resource. When it comes to individuals, making sure that they have the 72 hours worth of food and the ability to self-sustain for a few days. The other piece that we've seen over the last 5 years is those who have been killed or hurt from large fires have been those that have some sort of either functional need or a disability or elderly, right? They're the most vulnerable. The people in our community who are the most vulnerable are the ones that are disproportionately impacted by disasters and climate change. So when we think about preparedness, it's super important that we also put on the top of that list of how do I ensure that my neighbors or my community members who may be vulnerable are also taken into consideration as a part of my plan. That is probably paramount to ensure that we don't leave those behind that are unfortunately the most affected.
Hillary, I think it's fair to say your website too, doesn't it? It has lots of information on climate change, and Hillary's shop, Hillary and her team, they do some amazing work. So Hillary, I'll let you speak to it, but it seems like every time I need to reach out to you and your shop, you guys have some pretty amazing information available.
We are, thank you, Dan. We are doing our best to try to compile existing information out there and help improve awareness around climate change and also help encourage and empower actions to help increase the resiliency of our communities. So one area that I think people can take action is to get involved in their local community, especially right now. And as Chief Cox mentioned, the housing elements are getting updated. Land use is a critical way to think about how we increase our resiliency as we make sure that we're able to build the housing that we need for our communities. So, I encourage everyone to get involved in those local conversations and think about what policies we need to put in place for climate resilience, be champions in your personal networks, and really get involved. And we're all part of the solution. And it's an opportunity, I think, right now to shape what the future of our communities look like.
And so for residents or organizations that are interested in having presentations about emergency preparedness or different metrics of sustainability, what are some opportunities that might be pursued with your various organizations? So how, outside of CERT that was mentioned by Marie or Civics 101 that Mitchell had mentioned in the chat, what are different ways that residents, businesses, interest groups can get engaged, become better prepared, and make themselves more effective responders to whatever the next disaster is, both for themselves, their families, or dependent upon where it occurs for their work sites, if that's where they're caught when it happens?
I would just suggest the same thing. If they would like to, is this based on Nicholas's Jonathan Nicholas's question, or was that separate, Julie?
Jonathan's question was the spark, but just thinking about, for example, if I get caught at my office, how can we make sure that we have the necessary evacuation plan? Or if there is some sort of emergency, just the rudimentary skills to handle that, and until first responders are able to arrive. So a little bit disaster prep, a little bit emergency response, but how can businesses and organizations better prepare themselves to care for one another during a disaster?
I think once again, that would sort of echo what I said previously is I'd probably contact your local jurisdiction and see if there's an opportunity available for someone to pay a visit, do a presentation, provide some sort of hands-on conversation about what might be best for your particular need. Everybody has a different need or interest, depending on whether it's a group, an organization, an individual. And I think if you start with reaching out to your local jurisdiction to see if they can provide some form of assistance, I think that's a good first start. And again, the county is always available. If the jurisdiction doesn't have the resources, not all cities and towns in the county have those resources. So the county is willing to step in if those needs can be met, and always happy to have a conversation to be at your service. But I would start with the local first, and then from there they can learn better what your interests are and build upon that. So that would be my suggestion, recommendation.
Any additions to that from Hillary or from Jonathan?
Not for me.
All right, then. So can you talk about what your collaboration has been with the Coastal Commission relative to emergency response, since we represent a couple of coastal towns in the county?
Yeah, I can speak to the wildfire piece, and maybe the biggest piece of this is fuel reduction. CAL FIRE recently, after quite a few years, completed the VTP, which is the Vegetation Treatment Program for California. In accompanying that was an EIR, Environmental Impact Report. In the San Mateo area, the area this doesn't cover is the area, the coastal zone, essentially. Again, being a leader, San Mateo County RCD, which is a resource conservation district, really led the way in forming a agreement with the Coastal Commission that's referred to as the Public Works Plan, that allows 3Cs and other partners to be able to take on that fuel reduction and vegetation management, building on that VTP and EIR that the state did. So my honest opinion is we've had really good luck and collaboration with the Coastal Commission on addressing this fuel reduction issue that really does affect the coast.
For me, we touch a lot of people. We touch a lot of organizations, everything from the state to local and in between. I don't recall anything recent with regard to communicating with the Coastal Commission, so I really can't say whether they're an ally or an impediment. We've just not had much contact with the Coastal Commission.
They've worked with the Coastal Commission on sea level rise. They put together a lot of guidance documents and best practices on how to address sea level rise in local planning documents, like local coastal programs. I did work at the Coastal Commission, so on those types of documents. So definitely kind of aware of what they've done on the climate change space.
And if we're winding down on our time, we have a few more moments. So if there are any additional questions please put them in the chat or in the Q&A. But from our panelists, if you have any additional thoughts that you'd like to share with the group, we would welcome them now. So you've exhausted all of your thoughts. It's daunting in a few ways.
I can just kind of summarize my thoughts in a little bit, Julie. And, what we always kind of come back to is this idea on wildfires in California. We're dealing with two issues simultaneously right now. We're dealing with the climate issue of kind of the atmosphere pulling more moisture out of the vegetation, longer, hotter days and hotter nights, changing vegetation type and tree mortality. That's one part of the problem that we're dealing with. The other part of the problem we're dealing with is kind of the human impacts over the last 100 years. We very successfully have fought wildfires for 100 years, but we are now reaping what we sow with that, in the sense that land in California is meant to burn every 30 to 50 years. So when it doesn't burn for 100 years, the implications of that are more drastic. We've built in places that are not easy to protect. Our population has moved out to the interface areas because we've protected the lands so much from wildfire. And we have this buildup of fuels across the state. So the climatic issues, the human issues, kind of multiplied together, are really the baseline for what we're dealing with right now on the fires that are more destructive, that are larger, or the fire seasons that are longer. And kind of to bring it all full circle today for me, is there is no single solution out of this wildfire problem. It does take efforts at every level, from local jurisdictions to homeowners to policymakers to firefighters. And I think right now we are just beginning to kind of get concurrence on an acknowledgement that that's actually the case. And I just want to kind of end by saying my hat's off to everyone for even being here to listen to this and to listen to us talk about this issue, because even 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been this front of mind. So I think this is the right first step. And when I look around San Mateo County, you know, we do have some of the best and the brightest leaders in this space. And so really, thank you for having me, and we have a lot of work to do.
And we have, sorry, she's turned on the fan. Apparently it's quite refreshing. Question in the chat from Redwood City Vice Mayor Hale. Giselle asks about utilizing our firefighters to share information about climate change, and also asks how cities can be better prepared and more productive in their own emergency response metrics. So anything on either of Giselle's questions?
Yeah, I think she's spot on. I think this is just starting to come forward as a mechanism for talking about climate change. And, you know, I think if we're honest about it, climate change has been a little bit of a political hot potato in the fire service for the past. But I think the facts are what we really stick to. The temperatures, especially the nighttime temperatures that we're dealing with, the fuel evaporation, and the kind of the statistics that we can't argue with, and what that means to us as firefighters on the ground. So I think we're just starting to ease into that, and I hope that we see more of it moving forward, because it really is, you know, it's the facts, and that's what we like to project.
Hillary or Dan? Dan.
You want to go first?
I'll let Dan. Dan, do you have any response to the last question?
No, I was just going to add to what Julie asked before that last question popped in, and, you know, any closing remarks. I think it's been a pleasure to be with all of you, and I think that we're seeing more of this collaboration and more of this outreach and more of everything that Chief Cox described. I would only encourage everybody to keep the momentum going, because it's not going to go away. It's just simply not going to go away. So the sky's not falling. We all don't have to scatter and run. I think we're doing a good job, but we can continue to do a good job and do a better job in the future. So it's not going away. We need to continue to collaborate. We need to continue to be informed. We need to understand the issues, and we need to hold hands to get it done. So that would be my message, is just keep moving forward, keep holding hands, and let's make it work together like we have. And let's keep our fingers crossed that things won't get out of hand. But thank you so much for the opportunity to share. I get so sick of hearing myself talk, but it's nice to speak with all of you this morning.
Yeah, I would add in closing, also really appreciate the opportunity to be on this panel. I've learned a lot, and hope the information was helpful for everyone. I thought it might be helpful to talk about one other engagement effort that I didn't mention. We have a green business program. It's part of a statewide network to help businesses reduce their environmental impact. And this year, we're actually going to start to look at adding some resilience measures to the program. So right now it's focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, energy use, waste, and so forth. And we thought this is also an opportunity to really think about how can businesses play a part in increasing resilience, whether it's air filters or heat measures or backup power systems. So that's something I'm excited to think about, and happy to provide more information to anyone who's interested. And thanks again. Great moderating, Julie. Happy to spend time with your assistant as well today.
Yes, I apologize, everyone, for my very active, unpaid, unproductive intern on this Zoom this morning. She is a very, very collaborative individual, especially when mommy is working. And now there's a hair tie on her nose. All right. So with that, we are going to send everyone to, excuse you. We are going to send everyone to a 15-minute break because I certainly know that I need it. And we will be back here at 10:30 for our next panel with my very good friend, Assembly Speaker Pro Tem Kevin Mullen. So go forth. Okay, thank you. Go forth. We will see you back at 10:30.
Mommy, I